Attack is the main way to win in chess. Pretty much everyone loves to attack, and the main question really is how can you attack effectively? I'm Igor Smirnov, international grandmaster and a chess coach from the Remote Chess Academy, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you into this course. It is designed to be a step-by-step tutorial which will convert you into a strong master of attack. And in the very first lesson, we'll talk about the very beginning of the subject, how to initiate an attack. Very often students tell me, I can find brilliant attacking combinations while I'm solving tactical puzzles, but somehow I never get to these kind of positions in my real games. Or they complain that they play some sort of little bit of a boring openings and they're not sure how to begin attack from those kind of closed positions. Let's see how you can start an attack in any kind of game that you play. Let me share with you the strategy of attack, and after that we will move on to the specific examples. Right now we're not talking about the specific position, of course, hey, it's just the starting position of a chess game, but about the general strategy of attack. Let's just make some first moves, e4, e5, and for instance, let's focus on one piece alone, on this knight on b1. How can this knight possibly attack black? Well, at the moment there is clearly no way to do this just because the knight is too far away from black's pieces and pawns. Therefore, the first task for us is to just move this knight forward. So let's say we do this. We play knight c3, say black plays the same, knight c6. Is there any way for us to attack with this knight? Still, there is nothing. But we can still keep moving it forward and put it in the central position on the d5. And from here, it already controls a wide range of squares. And half of these squares are on the black's half of the board, and therefore we maximize the chances for this knight to take part into our attack in the future. Once again, it still is not attacking anything at the moment, but we maximize the chances for the knight to be attacking in the future. So that's the very first thing that you need to care about, which is called activity. Putting your pieces on the squares where they will control the greatest amount of squares, just like the knight. And in the vast majority of the cases, it simply means that you need to move your pieces forward and in the center. There is another interesting thing that happens as long as you activate your pieces. They automatically start finding some small targets. Just like in this current position, the knight from d5 already took aim at black's pawn on c7. And therefore, right now this pawn is protected by the queen. Nevertheless, we already may feel that it puts a little bit of pressure on the black's position. For example, the black's queen from here cannot go away because it has to protect that pawn on c7. And therefore, we may already say that the knight is already causing some unpleasant pressure on the black's position. And there is one more general thing to mention here. There is also a thing called initiative. Say in this position white plays knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5. Can we really say that white began his attack? Well, not really. It's just too early to talk about this, and there are many ways black can defend that pawn on e5 easily. Therefore, it's too early to talk about an attack, but nevertheless we call it initiative. It means that white starts creating some little problems for black, and even though there is an easy way for black to defend, nevertheless it just puts white in a dominant position. It means that white is leading the game, white is setting the tone for the game, white is forcing black's responses, and that is called initiative. Later on it will translate to a more significant attack, but it begins with activity and initiative. Just to summarize this general strategy, initially in a game of chess there is no way to attack really. What you can do is just to care about your activity, putting your pieces out, making the moves of them forward closer to the opponent's position where they will attack the wide range of squares, and simultaneously they will already start creating some little first problems for black so that it helps you to seize the initiative. And as you keep doing this, gradually it will develop into a more solid attack. Once again, the moves that I've been showing you right here are not like the real game, it was just to illustrate this general strategy. And now we'll move on to the specific examples and we'll see how this general strategy can work in your practical games. And here is the first real-life example. It's the game between two club-level players. I want you to take very practical examples that you can easily relate to, and therefore in this course we will be analyzing not only the games of the world top players, but also the games of players who are at a similar level to you. Alright, so here it was White's turn, and here's the question: how can White begin his attack? Well, as we discussed earlier, the general strategy suggests that first you can start attack out of nothing. You gotta first work on activity of your pieces, bring them forward, centralize them. And therefore in this position White should have finalized his development and gradually increase activity of his pieces. Instead he decided to try out an immediate attacking plan, and he pushed his pawn forward to g4. You may notice the White's intention pretty clearly. He wants to open up these lines on the king side, and after the trade-off of the pawns he certainly was going to push the pawn forward to h5 in the future and just open the position around the black's king and start an attack there. But as we already said, it's all good, but it will only work if you have enough activity of your pieces. While in this position, if you take a look at the White's pieces, most of them are still standing on the first rank, never made a single move in this game. There is also the bishop standing on the second rank, still far away from black's position, and the knight is standing on the b3 on the queen side. Again, it's not very active there, it doesn't do much, and it's still far away from the king side. Therefore, if you take a look at the White's pieces, you can definitely see that they are far away, they are not active, they are not advanced, they are not centralized, and they do not really attack anything in the black's position. And that is why such an attacking attempt as just pushing the pawn forward is doomed to fail. And this is exactly what happened in the game. Black played correctly queen to f6, and all of a sudden it turned out that now White is in trouble. The f2 pawn is being attacked. White played pawn to f3, and Black played knight g3, moving the knight forward, attacking the White's rook on h1. The rook was placed to h3, and here in the actual game Black played queen to f4, which is not bad, but there was even a stronger continuation. Black could have played h takes g4, continuing to open up the position. And it turns out that White cannot really capture the knight. By the way, before we go into that line, let's just see what happens if White recaptures the pawn. In this case, Black can jump with the knight back to e4, renewing this threat of queen h2 checkmate, and it's not easy for White to stop it. The White's rook has to keep covering that pawn on h4, which is also attacked by Black, and therefore White is in trouble. Let's take a step back. In this position, if White would just grab the knight with the rook, Black can continue queen takes h4, and all of a sudden, thanks to this pin, White is just losing the game. White can try to play king f2, but in this case Black continues queen h2 check. In order to save the rook, the only way for White is to play rook g2. Black can continue pawn to g3 check, king goes back, and then bishop goes to h3, beating the rook, and there is no way for White to stop queen takes g2 on the next move, and Black has decisive material advantage, and he's continuing his attack. Therefore, in this game we just have seen how players try to attack just because they wish to do so. Like in this example, White played a little bit earlier. Let me just show you once again the starting position of this example. So here White played pawn to g4 just because he was hoping to start an attack, but he didn't know how to do it the right way. And I hope that after this lesson you will have a clear understanding of how to do this. Alright, let's move on. Here's another game. Once again, it's the game of club level players. The white player is Kesaris and the black player is Papadopoulos. Alright, in the current situation, White have noticed that there is no way for him to save his pawn on the c4, because due to this pin along the c-file, there is no way for White to do anything about that pawn, and therefore he's going to lose it. Black is going to capture it on the next move. But White realized that since he's going to lose the pawn anyway, he needs to put his stake on attack. And before he can start attacking, he needs to activate his pieces. And this is exactly what he started doing here. He played rook to d1, putting his rook, which previously was passive on f1, now it's in the open file, controlling a lot of squares there. Right now it doesn't do anything particular for white, but just like we discussed earlier, the first thing to do is to increase activity of your pieces, and later on it will translate into attack. So black grab the pawn, and white jump with the knight forward, knight f5. Now this knight, together with the rook, already started creating some little bit of threats to black. White can jump on d6 either with his knight or rook. And all of a sudden it already creates some serious, actually attacking opportunities for white. For example, imagine black just ignores it and pushes his pawn forward. In this case, white can really go forward with the rook to d6, aiming on the next move to destroy black's castling position. And in a variation like this, pawn takes, white can just move his queen forward, delivering checkmate on the next move on the g7 square. So it just shows that the white's attack, which started seemingly, out of nowhere, already has a pretty strong potential. Anyway, let's take a few steps back. Black did not fall into this trap. He covered the square d6 by playing knight to e8. And that's another thing which sometimes people underestimate. They think, well, so even if I create this kind of threat, black can defend easily. So what's the point even for white of doing this? Well, like we discussed earlier, the point is to seize the initiative. So start from little simple threats that your opponent can defend against, but it helps you to begin dominating, so that your opponent cannot do whatever he wants to do, but he has to just take some passive moves like knight to e8 simply to cover his weaknesses. Alright, now white continued. He played bishop to h3. Now the bishop also starts controlling this long diagonal instead of being totally passive on g2 as it used to be. Right now, again, it does not really attack anything particular because the bishop is actually unprotected, and therefore, anyway, white cannot remove the knight from f5. But again, it just increases the activity. Black played king h7, white played king g2 to support the bishop and now make it possible for the knight to actually go away, enabling this discovered attack with the bishop. Therefore, black played queen to f6 to remove the queen from this potentially dangerous diagonal. White played knight e3, attacking the rook. This is once again this example of initiative, taking these little attacking moves that black can defend against easily, but nevertheless it's somewhat annoying for black. And also there is always a chance that your opponent will overlook something. For example, if black plays rook to c7 here, which is a mistake, white would be able to jump with his knight to d5, and it's a fork. Things like that happen very often, especially in blitz games, and it happens as a result of your active game, as a result of your pieces being active. In the game it didn't happen. Black played rook to c6, white continued knight to d5, black played queen g5, and here in the game white played bishop f5, which was not the best idea, because the bishop was already active here on the h3. But the question white should have asked himself is, how could white continue increasing activity of his pieces? If you just take a look at the different pieces that white has and ask yourself, are all of them already active? Are all of them controlling lots of squares on the board? And if you just think about this, you would realize that while white already has activated the rook, the knight, and the bishop, there are still two other pieces like the rook on c1 and the queen on e2, which did not take active part in the game, and therefore it was time for white to move them to more active squares. For example, white could have played rook to b1, putting this other rook on an open line, and at the same time attacking black's knight on b8. And that would probably win the game right away, because the only square for the knight to go away is to go to a6, and here white has a wide range of lucrative options. White can go with the bishop to d7, with a double attack to the rook and the knight on e8, and that would already win some material on the spot. Computer even suggests first give and check, and after king g8, going with the rook to b7 just to maximize the activity of every white's piece. And that is also a brilliant position, because right now white is a pawn down, and at the moment it does not even seem like white created some very strong attacking threats, and at the same time black is totally defenseless, just because white's pieces are controlling so many squares all around the board that basically white just has too many attacking opportunities and black has nothing to do about it. The rook from b7 is attacking the pawn on a7, taking aim at f7 square, the bishop is ready to jump forward, the knight is ready to jump forward, deliver the fork, and as you can see it's just too much for black to handle. For example, if black would just push with his pawn forward to c3, white can jump there, knight to e7 right away with a fork, or even stronger, he can first play h4, forcing the queen to go back, and the only square for the queen is d8, and then knight e7 is even stronger because in this case it not only attacks the king and the rook, but also there is a discovered attack to the queen. I'm going through these lines a little bit quickly, and it might be a little bit hard to understand, all the side lines and everything that's going on here, but, analyzing all the side lines will take a lot of time, and I don't think it's that much necessary. I think that the most important thing for you is just to grasp this general idea, this general spirit, that you need to put your pieces on the squares where they are going to control the greatest number of squares. And usually it means to move your pieces forward, to provide them with the open lines and diagonals, to centralize them. And as you do this, you start controlling more and more squares on the chessboard, and inevitably it translates into the attack, because inevitably your pieces start firing, some of the opponent's pawns and pieces and his king. So that's the way to go. Activate your pieces, bring them forward, start from some little threats which will help you to seize the initiative, and later on it will bring you to the point where your attack is unstoppable.